That man, with a cold smile, dropped the divorce papers right next to the fever medicine, where his wife lay curled up, burning with a 39-degree fever. He thought she would break down, would beg. But what he didn't expect was that the cruel moment didn't destroy her. It awakened the monster within. She would rise, redraw her life in blood and tears, and force the whole world, especially that man, to see her with new eyes. This is not a story of surviving tragedy. This is a breathtaking journey of rebirth.
Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below.
My name is Emily Carter. I'm 31 years old, and what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. I always thought if my life ever fell apart, it would do so dramatically, with shattered glass, screaming, a storm raging outside, something fittingly theatrical. But in reality, it happened quietly, almost politely. A Tuesday evening, a flickering light bulb, the faint scent of reheated soup I couldn't stomach. It was November in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the cold had finally sunk into the bones of the city. I was bundled in a threadbare sweater on the living room couch, the blanket slipping off my shoulder as I hunched over my old laptop. The screen flickered like it was struggling to breathe, same as me. My fever had climbed to 102, maybe higher. I didn't have a thermometer anymore. Ryan had taken it with him the last time he stormed out, mumbling something about me over-dramatizing everything. Still, I tried to finish the email. My hands shook. Each keystroke felt like dragging a boulder uphill. My vision blurred, the words on the screen swimming in and out of focus. But I had to hit send. I was still freelancing, secretly. After Ryan asked me to stop working last year, I started taking jobs under a pseudonym. Little projects, just enough to pay for my prescriptions and keep some piece of myself alive. I was halfway through attaching the final draft when I heard the front door click open. My pulse jumped. Ryan. I didn't look up. I kept typing, praying he'd walk past me and head straight to the bedroom like usual. Maybe this would be one of the nights he pretended I didn't exist. No such luck. The sound of his shoes on hardwood, precise, purposeful, grew louder. I inhaled slowly, bracing myself. Then, a loud thud as a thick envelope hit the coffee table in front of me. "Sign those," he said coldly, "when you're done playing sick." I blinked. For a moment, I wasn't sure I heard him right. My heart stumbled in my chest. I looked up slowly. He stood over me, arms crossed, coat still on, not even pretending to check if I was okay. "What is this?" I rasped, throat dry, lips chapped from days of fever. He didn't answer, just turned and headed for the door again, as if dropping divorce papers in front of your sick wife was the same as tossing junk mail on the counter. I forced myself to sit up, every muscle aching. The words on the envelope swam into view. Dissolution of marriage. It wasn't like I hadn't seen it coming. We'd been unraveling for years. Still, something about the formality of it, the cruelty of the timing, felt like a slap. And then, as if he couldn't resist twisting the knife, he paused at the door and said over his shoulder, "I need a partner, Emily, not a liability." My mouth went dry. He glanced back once, just long enough to deliver the final blow. "You've been using your illness as an excuse, and I'm done enabling it." And then he was gone. No explanation, no remorse. Just the sound of the door clicking shut behind him, followed by a silence so vast it pressed against my ribs. I didn't cry. I wish I could tell you I broke into sobs, threw something, screamed. But all I did was sit there, frozen. The ache in my joints suddenly dulled by something colder than fever. Something worse than heartbreak. Disbelief. Not because he was leaving, but because of what he believed about me. Ryan had watched me limp through flare-ups. He'd held my hair back when I vomited from medication. He'd driven me to urgent care more times than I could count. And still, after all that, he thought I was faking. Or worse, exaggerating. I reached for the papers with a shaking hand, but my vision tilted. My head spun. The fever surged again, and the world slipped sideways. I collapsed back onto the couch, too weak to fight it. Darkness took me. I woke sometime after dawn. My mouth tasted like rust. My limbs were soaked in sweat. I pushed myself upright and looked around. The papers were still on the table. My laptop had died. My phone, still silent. Not a single missed call, not a single message. I was alone, utterly, terrifyingly alone. And for a long, long moment, I sat there in that hollow kind of quiet that feels like it could last forever. Until something stirred. Not anger, not sorrow, but a thin, sharp thread of clarity. I had given that man a decade of my life, 10 years of silent swallowing, dream-burying, self-shrinking devotion. I moved cities for him, postponed my career, smiled through condescending dinner parties with his partners and their wives who called me sweet, but never smart. I held him when his second startup failed. I budgeted our groceries when he blew his savings. I forgave him when he called me a burden during a fight and swore he didn't mean it. I stayed. And when I got sick, when I was diagnosed with chronic autoimmune issues that knocked me off my feet for weeks at a time, I expected him to show up the way I had for him. He didn't. Instead, he resented me for not bouncing back fast enough. And now, he had the audacity to paint himself as the one who was done enabling me. Something snapped. I stood slowly, swaying slightly. My reflection in the window caught my eye. Sunken eyes, hollow cheeks. But beneath it, something fierce. I found the tote bag I hadn't touched in over a year. Inside it was a worn folder with my old resume, some certifications, and a USB drive. It felt like opening a time capsule from a life before Ryan, before illness, before compromise, before I stopped believing in myself. I powered up the laptop, plugged in the USB, and there it was. Campaign mock-ups, brand strategies, design proposals. Work I had been proud of. Work that once lit me up. I had forgotten what it felt like to be proud. That was about to change. I wasn't going to crawl back. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't even going to fight him. I was going to become someone he'd never have the right to know again. But not out of revenge, out of reclamation. This was mine, my story, my voice, my name, and I was taking it back. There's a kind of silence that follows heartbreak, a silence so thick it feels like it has weight. After Ryan left, that silence wrapped around my apartment like a second skin. It filled the corners of every room, followed me into the shower, hovered over my bed at night. But worse than the silence was the question that haunted every breath. What if he was right? What if I had let myself disappear? What if the version of me I missed, the ambitious, magnetic, unstoppable Emily, was long gone? I sat on the kitchen floor for hours the day after he left, staring at the tile, knees hugged to my chest, my breath catching on every inhale like it didn't want to carry on. My body was still weak. I'd barely eaten, but it wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional depletion. My soul felt like someone had wrung it out and hung it up to dry. I didn't even cry. I was past tears. And yet, beneath all of that heaviness, something kept pulsing, a memory, a whisper. I was 17 again, standing on the stage at Lincoln High, holding my first place ribbon for the regional art competition. I remember the heat of the spotlight, the way my fingers trembled, not from fear, but exhilaration. I remember looking into the crowd and seeing my mom's proud smile. I had felt powerful then, boundless, like the whole world was made of blank canvases, waiting for my mark. Where had that girl gone? No, she hadn't gone anywhere. She'd just gotten quiet. Ryan didn't kill her. Life didn't kill her. I had buried her myself, one compromise at a time. I gave up my studio when we moved for his job in Miami. I let go of my freelance clients when he said he needed less chaos at home. I stopped painting when he made jokes about arts and crafts, cluttering the house. And slowly, like erosion, I disappeared. So I did the only thing I could think of. I got up, dragged myself to the desk, and opened my laptop. I went to the job board where I used to find freelance work. It had been months, maybe a year, but my account was still active. I scrolled through listings. Logo redesign needed for sustainable skincare brand. Email strategist for online boutique. Pitch deck for startup seed funding. I clicked on one, then another, then 10. But as I hovered over apply, my hand stopped. A voice in my head, his voice, whispered, "No one takes you seriously anymore. You're sick. You're irrelevant." I slammed the laptop shut. The thing about emotional abuse, because that's what it was, even if it was quiet, even if it was clean, is that it doesn't just cut you down. It convinces you were never tall to begin with. That night, I sat in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the fridge in the next room. The apartment was too quiet. I realized I hadn't heard my own laughter in months. I picked up my phone, opened notes, and I started writing a letter, not to Ryan, not to the world, to myself. Dear Emily, you are still here. You are not broken. You are healing. You are not weak. You are rediscovering your strength. He left because he couldn't stand the mirror you held up to his own emptiness. That is not your fault. You once created beauty out of nothing. You once inspired others just by showing up in your full truth. You still can, but not for revenge. For you. Get up. Just for today. Tomorrow can worry about itself. Love, me. I read it out loud. My voice cracked on the second line. I fell asleep clutching that phone like it was the only anchor keeping me tethered to reality. The next morning, I got up before sunrise. My fever had broken. My muscles still ached, but I could move. I made a single piece of toast, ate half of it, and opened the blinds. The golden morning light spilled into the room like hope. I powered on my laptop again. This time, I didn't stop at the listings. I rewrote my bio. I uploaded a new profile picture, one I took 5 minutes prior, no makeup, but honest. I listed my availability. Then I applied to 3 projects, only 3, but I told myself that was enough. By noon, I received a reply. A boutique candle brand was interested in hiring me to rework their visual identity. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't big money, but it was mine. I called my best friend Clara for the first time in weeks. She screamed when she heard my voice. Jesus, Em, I was starting to think you'd gone off the grid. Not gone, I said softly. Just finding my way back. She drove over with soup, cookies, and 2 bottles of nail polish. We sat cross-legged on my rug, painting each other's toes like we used to in college. She didn't ask about Ryan. She didn't need to. When she hugged me goodbye, she whispered, "You're coming back. I can feel it." I smiled. Not because I believed her yet, but because I wanted to. And that was something. That night, I found the canvas Ryan had stuffed into the back of the hallway closet. A piece I never finished, a woman with her back to the viewer, standing at the edge of a dark sea. Her hair was wild, her spine defiant. I pulled it out, placed it on the easel, sat in front of it, and for the first time in years, I picked up a brush. Healing isn't linear. No one tells you that. They don't prepare you for the days when you feel like you're moving forward, only to wake up the next morning suffocating in the same fog you thought you'd escaped. A week after Ryan left, I decided to go outside. It wasn't brave, it wasn't symbolic, it was survival. I had no more groceries. My fridge held half a lemon, expired almond milk, and a wilting head of lettuce that looked like a metaphor for my life. I stood in front of the mirror for 10 minutes before I left. My reflection looked unfamiliar. Hollowed cheeks, tired eyes, but under all that, there she was again. Faint but present. The old Emily, not the perfect one, but the one who tried. That was enough. I pulled on jeans that fit a little too loosely now, and a hoodie I used to wear to early client meetings. The one Ryan said made me look unprofessional. I wore it anyway. As I stepped outside, the world felt loud. Cars honking, kids shouting in a park nearby, dogs barking. Like the volume had been cranked up on a life I'd muted for too long. The cold air cut across my skin, waking something in me that had been numb for months. I walked to the corner store. My limbs still ached, but I kept going. Inside, everything felt oddly overwhelming. The harsh lights, the buzzing refrigerator, the rows of cereal boxes I used to buy on autopilot, now stared at me like strangers. I hovered in front of the tea section for 5 full minutes before someone brushed past and mumbled, "Excuse me." I flinched. I didn't realize how much Ryan had trained me to shrink. In public, in conversations, in my own skin. I paid and walked out into the biting air, clutching the small brown bag like a shield. But as I turned the corner, I saw something that made me stop cold. A flyer taped to the window of a tiny art supply shop. Call for local artists. Pop-up exhibition December 10th. My heart kicked. The last time I exhibited my art was 3 years ago. Back when I still believed people might care about what I had to say without editing myself for someone else's comfort. Ryan came to that show late, left early. Never asked about the paintings, but this poster, this was an invitation, not from the world, from the universe. I took a photo of the flyer. My hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from adrenaline. When I got home, I set the tea on the counter and went straight to my desk. The client I'd taken on earlier that week had sent glowing feedback. This is exactly what I imagined, Emily. You're magic. Magic. I hadn't heard that word in years, and I wasn't sure I believed it yet. But someone out there had said it. That meant it existed, even if just a flicker. I opened the folder of my unfinished artwork, pieces I'd started years ago and never had the courage or space to complete. And then I did something radical. I emailed the gallery. Subject, submission, local artist body. Hi there, my name is Emily Carter. I'm a graphic designer and mixed media painter based in Charlotte. I saw your flyer and would love to submit some of my work for the December pop-up. Attached are 3 samples. Thank you for the opportunity. Warmly, Emily. I hovered over the send button. That voice crept in again. Who do you think you are? You're not relevant anymore. You're late. You're done. But another voice answered, quieter but steadier. Maybe. But what if I'm just getting started? I hit send. Then I cried. Not because I was sad, but because it felt like a small kind of rebellion. A quiet uprising from the girl inside me who refused to stay buried. The next day, I got a reply. We'd love to feature your work. 7 words, and just like that, a piece of the world cracked open again. Over the next few days, I worked. I worked like someone on fire, not with rage, but with clarity. I pulled out paints, reactivated dried brushes, bought new canvases with money I barely had. My apartment turned into a beautiful, chaotic mess. Color on the walls, drafts taped to the fridge, sticky notes everywhere. I started waking up earlier, eating again, showering. I sent Clara progress photos, and she sent back emojis and voice notes that sounded like sunshine. That one! Oh my God, Emily! That piece feels like a scream wrapped in silk. I laughed when I heard it. Really laughed. It was the first time in months I didn't sound like someone pretending to be okay. And then, right when I thought the momentum might finally carry me forward without interruption, Ryan emailed me. Subject, apartment and accounts. No greeting, no emotion, just instructions. He wanted to divide things fairly and suggested we meet briefly and civilly at the bank to close our joint accounts. My stomach twisted. I sat there staring at the screen, heart pounding. Not because I wanted him back, I didn't. But because a part of me still panicked at the thought of being in front of him, knowing he'd look at me with that same indifference, knowing he thought I was weak, unworthy, forgettable. But then I remembered the canvas I finished the night before, the one with a woman standing barefoot on a rooftop, wind tearing through her hair, eyes closed, but smiling. She looked free. And suddenly, I didn't want to hide anymore. I replied, sure. Friday at 2. I'll bring my half of the paperwork. Please don't be late. No bitterness, no begging, just business. I was no longer the girl waiting for his approval. I was the woman building a life he'd never understand. And when Friday came, I would walk into that bank, not as the ex-wife he tried to forget, but as Emily Carter, the artist, the fighter, the woman who finally stopped shrinking. Friday morning arrived like an uninvited guest, sharp, gray, and colder than expected. I woke before the alarm, not because I was anxious, but because my body knew today marked something final. Not just the closing of a bank account, but the quiet burial of a marriage that had died long before the paperwork arrived. I took my time getting ready, not to impress him. That part of me was long gone, but because today I wanted to walk in there looking exactly like the woman I had become, the one who rose up from the wreckage he left behind. I chose black jeans, a fitted gray sweater, and the same boots I wore the day I first pitched a client and landed my biggest contract. Before Ryan, before the compromises. I tied my hair back in a soft low bun. Simple, clean, steady. At 1:50 p.m., I parked in front of the bank, where we used to share a joint account, a relic from the days when we said ours and meant it. I sat in the car for a minute, hands on the steering wheel, breathing, not because I was afraid of seeing him, but because I was afraid I might feel nothing at all. That kind of emptiness scared me more than pain ever could. When I finally stepped inside, the smell hit me first. Air conditioning, carpet glue, and sterile ambition. Banks always felt like places where people pretended to have control. Ryan was already there, seated in one of those stiff chairs by the glass office. He didn't notice me at first. He was scrolling on his phone, jaw tight, suit impeccable. Still that same meticulous image, as if his whole identity had been dry cleaned into perfection. When he finally looked up and saw me, his brows lifted slightly. Not in greeting, in calculation, like he hadn't expected me to look like I belonged here anymore. I walked over, calm, steady. "Emily," he said, standing, clearing his throat. "Ryan," I replied. No smile, no hug, just names. The bank manager led us into a small office with 2 bright lights, and a generic painting of a mountain hung slightly crooked on the wall. She introduced herself and laid out the documents. We sat, not across from each other, side by side. Strange, how even now we still pretended to be on the same team. As we flipped through the pages, signing here and initialing there, I caught glimpses of him from the corner of my eye. His fingers tapped the table softly, his pen strokes were rushed. His knee bounced beneath the desk. He wanted this over with. That made 2 of us. About halfway through, he finally broke the silence. "I saw your artwork." I paused mid-signature. He didn't look at me, just kept his eyes on the paper. "You posted some online. Clara shared it." Of course she did. Clara never had a poker face, especially when she was proud. "I didn't realize you were still doing that," he added. I capped my pen and turned to look at him fully. "I never stopped," I said quietly. "You just stopped noticing." That landed. He blinked, his jaw tightening the way it always did when he was caught off guard. The bank manager excused herself to grab another form. We were alone. Ryan leaned back, folding his arms. "You look good," he said finally, like it cost him something. "I am good," I replied. "You just didn't stick around long enough to see it." There it was, clarity. It didn't come with shouting. It didn't need a grand confrontation. It came with stillness, with knowing. He exhaled, eyes darting toward the window. I wondered if he ever regretted it. Not the leaving, but the way he left. The cowardice of it, the timing, the complete refusal to see me as anything more than inconvenient. "You know," he said suddenly, voice low, "I didn't mean to hurt you." I tilted my head slightly. "No, you just didn't care enough not to." That shut him up. He nodded slowly, a shallow attempt at humility, but I didn't need it. I wasn't there for closure from him. I had already given that to myself. The manager returned, cheerful and oblivious, sliding the final set of forms toward us. We signed the last page in silence, and just like that, it was done. Our names were no longer attached to the same account, no longer tethered in legal obligation. We stood, shook hands with the manager, and walked out together, 2 ghosts exiting the same funeral. Outside, the afternoon sun filtered through bare trees. Wind moved gently through the parking lot. The world continued, indifferent, unburdened. We reached our cars. He paused, keys in hand. "I hope things work out for you," he said, like a man who wanted to say something kind but didn't quite know how. "They already are," I said, and I meant it. He hesitated like he might say more, but I turned and walked away first. I didn't owe him my time anymore. As I drove home, I didn't cry. I didn't replay the conversation. I didn't second-guess my words. I turned on the radio and let the music fill the silence he used to own. That night, I opened the windows to let the cold air in. The apartment felt different. Not bigger, not lonelier, just mine. I lit a candle, opened a bottle of wine, and pulled out the unfinished canvas I'd set aside weeks ago, the one I hadn't been ready to face. I titled it Closure. Not because it was the end of the story, but because it was the beginning of a new one. I painted for hours, barefoot, music low, the city breathing quietly outside. Around midnight, I stepped back and looked at what I'd created. A woman standing barefoot in a clearing at dusk. The trees behind her dark and tangled, but she's facing forward. Her hands are empty but open. Her chest lifted, her eyes calm, not angry, not sad. Free, It wasn't perfect, but neither was I. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't want to be. The night of the exhibition came cloaked in cold and clarity. Charlotte's skyline shimmered in the distance. But down here, at the small gallery on East Tremont, life felt softer. Yellow light spilled through tall windows, pooling onto the sidewalk like a quiet invitation. Above the door, a sign read, Emerging Voices, Winter Collection, featuring Emily Carter, mixed media artist, my name. On glass, for the first time in years, it didn't feel like I was pretending. I stood outside for a full minute before entering, gloved hands wrapped tightly around my phone. It buzzed with a message from Clara. Inside already, your pieces are stunning. Don't faint. Love you. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I tucked the phone away and stepped inside. The warmth hit me immediately. Not just the heat, but the hum, the low murmur of conversation, the clink of glasses, the soft jazz curling from hidden speakers. People were scattered throughout the open space, pausing in front of artwork, some sipping wine, others staring in silence. And somewhere in all that gentle noise were my paintings. My breath caught. Clara spotted me first. She bounded over, looking too glamorous for a casual Friday. Burgundy dress, gold earrings, confidence like armor. You made it, she whispered, pulling me into a tight hug. And you look incredible. I tried to respond, but my voice felt stuck in my throat. She pulled back slightly and looked at me, eyes softening. Don't disappear on me now. You earned this moment, Em. I nodded. My heart was thudding. Not out of fear, but disbelief. I scanned the room, and there they were, my 4 selected works, lined across the far wall in perfect balance. Spotlights washed over them, bringing every brushstroke into focus. Each painting felt like a part of my ribcage, removed and framed. The newest, Closure, anchored the display. It depicted a woman in profile, standing at the edge of a storm-drenched field. Her posture was quiet but resolute, hair tangled in the wind, her gaze fixed on a clearing in the distance. Not broken, not victorious, just becoming. 2 women stood in front of it now, speaking in low tones. One of them dabbed at her eyes. That did something to me. For so long, my pain had felt useless, like a weight with no purpose. But here it was, translated into color, shape, light. And it meant something to someone else. I floated through the crowd, a glass of white wine in hand, listening to fragments of conversations. The texture's beautiful. Feels like she's been holding her breath for years. That one looks like a goodbye that never got said. They weren't talking to me, but they were talking about me. And I didn't feel exposed. I felt understood. By 8:30, the room was full. I recognized a few faces. Artists from old classes, one of my college professors, even a past client who blinked twice before connecting the Emily Carter in front of her with the one who once designed her logo during a hospital stay. Clara clinked glasses with anyone who mentioned my name. She was doing PR like she'd been born for it. Around 9:00, just as I was beginning to feel like maybe I could breathe again, I saw her, Maggie, Ryan's sister. She walked in slowly, scanning the room. She hadn't changed much. Same soft curls, same cautious expression. Her coat was still on, scarf loose around her neck. I froze, heart suddenly louder. We hadn't spoken since before the divorce. Not a message, not a word. I didn't even know she followed my work. She saw me, our eyes met. She didn't look away. Instead, she walked straight over. "Hi, Em," she said gently, using the nickname only she and Clara ever did. "Maggie." She glanced around, then back to me. "I almost didn't come, but Clara sent me the link to your site last week." I raised an eyebrow. She said if I had any soul left, I'd show up. I snorted. That sounded like Clara. "I'm glad you did," I said, surprising myself. And I meant it. Maggie looked at the painting behind me, Closure. Her lips parted slightly. "She looks like you," she said. "She is me." Her shoulders dropped. "I'm sorry, Emily, for not checking in, for believing things I shouldn't have. Ryan, he made it sound like you just gave up." "I did," I replied calmly, "but not on life, on him." Maggie blinked. I could see her trying to hide how much that hit. She glanced again at the painting. This is powerful. I wasn't trying to be, I said. I was just trying to tell the truth. Maggie nodded slowly, like she finally understood something she hadn't been ready to see before. Before she left, she touched my hand lightly. You made it out. Not everyone does. No, I said. But I hope someone sees this and realizes they can. She gave a tight smile. That someone might be me. The gallery slowly emptied. At 10:15 p.m., the curator walked over, beaming. We had over 150 guests tonight. Your corner was the most visited. I blinked. Really? She grinned. Your work. It speaks without shouting. That's rare. As she walked away, I sat on the small bench in front of closure, alone for the first time in hours. I stared at her, the woman in the field. She had no crown, no sword, but she had survived. So had I. Clara dropped beside me, offering the last of the wine in a plastic cup. She nudged my shoulder. Want to know how I know you're back? How? You're not hiding behind people anymore. You're making people stop and look. I laughed softly, and for the first time in years, I believed her. When I got home that night, the apartment was still. No music, no TV, just the echo of warmth that clung to my coat and hair and hands. I didn't shower, didn't check emails. I sat on the floor beside the easel and looked at the blank canvas, waiting for me, but I didn't feel pressure this time. No urgency, just peace. Before heading to bed, I checked my phone. One new message. Subject: Custom painting request body. Hi Emily, I saw your work tonight. It moved me in a way I didn't expect. My younger sister is going through something dark. I was wondering, do you take commissions? She doesn't talk much lately, but I think your art could say something to her that none of us can. Let me know. Anna. I stared at the screen, heart suddenly full. Not because it was a sale, but because it meant the thing that nearly destroyed me had become something that could save someone else. The week after the exhibition unfolded like a dream I didn't dare claim as mine. It started with the commission request from Anna. I'd replied the next morning with a simple, I'd be honored. Tell me about your sister. She wrote back a full page. Her sister Lila had just turned 22. She'd left college after a long, quiet battle with depression. Anna said she used to paint. Wild colors, big canvases, but hadn't touched a brush in almost a year. She didn't say much anymore, just drifted around the house like a shadow that used to be sunlight. Anna asked me to create something for her, not as a cure, not as a miracle, but as a mirror, one that didn't reflect the sadness, but the strength it took to keep waking up. I read the email 3 times. Then I opened a blank canvas. For the first time in years, I wasn't painting from pain. I was painting for someone else's survival. And in doing that, I realized mine had already happened. The piece took 5 days. I titled it Tether. It showed a girl underwater, not drowning, just suspended. Light streamed down from the surface above, and though she hadn't reached it yet, her eyes were open, searching, reaching. I sent Anna a photo. She called me 30 minutes later, in tears. She stood in front of it for 10 minutes, she whispered. Didn't say a word, just looked. Then she asked me where she left her brushes. I closed my eyes, let that settle. Healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like a girl picking up an old brush. More commissions followed, small ones, portraits, abstract grief. One woman asked me to paint a visual interpretation of what it felt like to lose her mother. Another wanted a piece to mark the day she left a violent marriage. Every canvas felt like an exchange, my truth for theirs. Clara started joking that I needed an assistant. I laughed it off until she handed me a spreadsheet of inquiries and said, "This is no longer a hobby, Emily. This is your comeback." And maybe it was, but something in me hesitated. A part that still flinched when the phone rang, that still waited for the other shoe to drop. I'd built something real, but the ghost of the girl who was abandoned still stood at the edge of the room, whispering, "Careful, don't trust too much." One morning, while reorganizing my files, I found an old folder labeled Sagemark 2017. It was the last big project I worked on before things got bad. Before Ryan asked me to take a break. It was a pitch deck for a boutique publishing agency, a visual rebrand, tone guidelines, and a campaign concept. My work had been bold, crisp, confident. I remembered the meeting clearly. The client loved it. Ryan didn't. He said it was too assertive, and that I came across aggressive. Funny how back then, I'd believed him. Looking at it now, I didn't see aggression. I saw a woman who knew exactly what she brought to the table. That afternoon, I updated my portfolio and reactivated my old design website. I wasn't just a painter. I was a strategist, a storyteller. I'd been small for so long, I forgot how to stand in full height. Not anymore. A few nights later, Clara invited me to a creative networking dinner hosted by a local entrepreneurs collective. At first, I resisted. It's just mingling, I argued. It's opportunity, she corrected. And also free dessert. I gave in. The restaurant was intimate. Twinkle lights, long wooden tables, mismatched chairs that made everything feel like someone's backyard. The kind of place where strangers could talk like old friends. I sat near the end of the table, quietly sipping wine, listening to people talk about startup apps, sustainable jewelry brands, indie publishing. Then someone across from me asked, "And you, what do you do?" I looked up. It was a man in his late 30s, messy hair, soft eyes, a quiet presence. He hadn't spoken much all night. "I'm an artist," I said. "And a designer, I guess." He smiled. "That's a good, I guess." I smiled back. I stopped saying it for a while, forgot it was still true. He extended a hand. "I'm Noah. I build things, mostly digital, sometimes wooden furniture when I'm anxious." That made me laugh. It wasn't charming in a practiced way. It was disarming. "Nice to meet you, Noah. I'm Emily. I paint people trying not to fall apart." He tilted his head, thoughtful. "Do they fall anyway?" "Sometimes, but that's where the color comes in." The conversation slipped into something easy after that. Not flirty, not intense, just honest. He didn't ask about my past. I didn't offer. And for once, that felt okay. Before we left, he handed me a small card. Not a business card, just a scrap of sketch paper with his number and the words, "If you ever want to talk about messy art or wobbly furniture." I tucked it into my coat pocket. Not like a lifeline, like a seed. That night, back home, I stood in front of the mirror again. But this time, I didn't look for damage or weakness. I looked for her, the version of me that kept walking, even when her knees buckled. And I finally saw her, whole. No longer defined by who left, or what broke, or even what survived. Just me. Emily Carter. Not rebuilding, already rebuilt. It began with a ping. A single notification on a sleepy Tuesday morning. I was still in my robe, standing barefoot in the kitchen, warming my hands around a mug of ginger tea. The light outside was soft and gray. Everything in the apartment smelled faintly of dried paint and chamomile. I picked up my phone without thinking. Emily Carter Art was tagged in a post. At first, I assumed it was someone from the gallery, a compliment maybe. Another quiet message of encouragement. I clicked. A photo of closure, taken from the corner of the room during the exhibition. The angle was beautiful, muted spotlight on the woman in the painting, her back to the world, facing something only she could see. But the caption below hit like ice water down my spine. Funny how trauma becomes marketable when the right face sells it. Ask Ryan Sinclair what really happened. Patsy art scam, not your story. Performance pain. Underneath it, 3 laughing emojis, and a tag, survivor or performer. I stared at the screen, heart frozen, fingers still. The room went completely silent. The post had 8 likes, 2 shares, my name, my painting, and a veiled accusation, all floating in the toxic soup of anonymous internet doubt. I clicked the account. It's truth. Unfinished, no profile picture. No post prior to this one. No followers, a burn account, created with one intention. Within an hour, the post had 15 shares. By noon, someone on a local forum had started a thread titled, "Is this artist faking her healing journey for fame?" They pulled photos of me from my art Instagram, compared them side by side with wedding pictures that Ryan had never taken down. They called me a narrative manipulator, claimed my pain was aesthetic, convenient, performative. One comment read, "Kind of wild how fast she went from sick wife to curated trauma queen." Another, "Pretty sure I heard Ryan say she wasn't even really sick." And there it was, the lie. The one that still knew how to crawl beneath my skin. Clara called first. "You saw it, right?" Her voice was sharp, protective. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely audible. "I'm reporting it, all of it. That thread, the post, the account. Hell, I'll call the internet police myself if I have to." I didn't answer. She paused. "Emily, talk to me." "I thought I was past this," I whispered. "I thought I'd already buried this part." "You did," she said firmly. "This isn't about truth. It's about control. Someone out there can't stand that you built something they can't tear down, so they're trying to rot it from the inside." I sat on the floor of the studio, back against the cold wall, staring at a half-finished canvas. "I don't want to explain myself again, Clara. I don't want to prove anything. I'm just tired." "I know," she said gently, "but you're not alone this time." That night, I couldn't sleep. The comments echoed, in my head like mosquitoes. Fake or too polished branding her trauma, I kept thinking. Would they say that if I were still sobbing in bed? If I'd stayed broken? There's a cruel irony in how the world demands you rise from your suffering, but only in silence. Only without confidence. Only if you remain soft enough to pity, never strong enough to respect. I finally gave up on sleep around 2 a.m. I pulled out a blank canvas, stared at it for almost an hour. Then, with shaking hands, I dipped my fingers into raw red paint and dragged them across the surface. Not carefully, not thoughtfully, just honestly. I didn't try to sketch or plan or curate. I poured color like grief, scraped lines like scars, let everything I'd held back for years, every humiliation, every time I'd been silenced, every self-doubt I swallowed, bleed into the canvas. When I stepped back, it looked like a storm had broken through a mirror. I titled it, "Let Them Talk." The next morning, I posted it online. No caption, no hashtags, just the image. I turned off my notifications, closed my laptop, walked out into the cold. Noah texted me while I was sitting in the park with a coffee I didn't finish drinking. "Noah, saw what's going around. You okay?" I stared at the message for a long time, then replied, "Me, not really, but I'm still standing. Noah, standing is good. Screaming through paint is better." Then a follow-up, "Noah, you want to come over tonight? I've got tea and a bookshelf that needs building. Thought you might want to hit something with a hammer." I smiled. Not because of the offer, but because he didn't ask me to be okay. He just made space for me as I was. By evening, the painting had been shared over 200 times. Artists, survivors, even strangers reposted it with messages like, "We don't owe you proof of our pain. Healing doesn't need permission. Let them talk. We'll keep living." Clara called again, breathless. "Your painting is trending, but in the good way." I let out a shaky laugh. Then she added more quietly, "Emily, I think this is your moment." "No," I said softly. "This is our moment." Late that night, as I brushed paint off my fingertips, I received one more message, from someone I hadn't expected. "Maggie." I saw the post. At first I didn't know what to think, but then I looked at closure again. And I remembered the girl you were when you first came into our family, so full of ideas and hope. "I'm sorry I didn't protect that girl better. I believe you, Emily. I do. I hope the world learns to too." I didn't reply right away. I just closed my eyes, exhaled deeply, and felt something heavy shift. Not disappear, but release. Before bed, I stood in front of Let Them Talk again. It wasn't beautiful, but it was true. And sometimes, that's the loudest revenge of all. I didn't expect my truth to be something people wanted to hear. Especially not after the storm, not after the whispers, the hashtags, the anonymous accounts that tried to reduce my story to a plotline they could dissect or discard. But healing has a strange rhythm. It doesn't knock. It arrives when you least expect it, sometimes in the form of an email. It was from Lauren Yu, senior editor at The Frame. A quiet but respected publication known for spotlighting artists whose work defied genre and explanation. I'd admired her writing for years. Sharp, compassionate, never performative. Her email was short, no pleasantries. Just this: "I don't want to scoop. I want your voice, not the noise, not the gossip. Just the truth, on your terms. If and when you're ready. I stared at the screen for a long time, and then I typed, simply, let's talk. We met 3 days later in a cafe tucked behind a secondhand bookstore on a quiet corner of Charlotte's South End. It smelled like burnt cinnamon and fresh paper. A fireplace flickered in the back. No one spoke above a whisper. It felt like the kind of place where silence was sacred, and words, when spoken, had to mean something. Lauren looked exactly how I imagined. No makeup, loose bun, pen-stained fingers. Calm eyes that didn't demand answers, just offered space. I'm not here to write your redemption arc, she said, sliding her notebook aside. You don't owe me neatness. You don't owe me wounds either, just honesty. For the first time in a long time, I didn't brace myself to speak. We talked for almost 2 hours, not just about Ryan, or the post, or the whispers that questioned whether my art was too intentional to be real. We talked about how people like their pain one of 2 ways, invisible or beautiful. I learned early on, I told her, that people are more comfortable with your sadness if it's palatable, if it makes them feel generous just by witnessing it. And if it doesn't, she asked, then they get suspicious. She nodded, scribbling gently. You think that's what happened? I think some people only know how to trust a version of you that stays small. I paused, then added, and when you outgrow their idea of you, they think it's manipulation instead of survival. She didn't write that down. She just met my gaze and whispered, that's the most painful kind of betrayal. The article went live the following Thursday. No capital letters in the title, no hashtags, no drama. Just this. Emily Carter, When Healing Refuses to Whisper. By Lauren Yu, for the frame, it opened with a quote she pulled from somewhere in the middle of our conversation. I'm not performing, I'm existing. And if that makes someone uncomfortable, that's not my weight to carry. The article didn't feel like a feature, it felt like a mirror. No pity, no spin, just the truth I hadn't known how to say out loud until someone finally asked the right question. The response was quiet, but thunderous in its own way. There were no trolls, no accusatory threads, no one demanding timelines or evidence or apologies. Instead, there were hundreds of messages, from strangers, from women, from former classmates I hadn't spoken to in years. This made me cry on a train. I didn't even know why at first. I finally see myself as more than what happened to me. You made me feel less alone. That matters. Thank you for refusing to shrink. Even Maggie texted. You didn't need my belief, but I'm so damn grateful I found it anyway. I sat on the floor of my studio and read them all. And I let them land, not as validation, but as evidence that the truth, when spoken without apology, has gravity. 3 days later, I received an invitation. Queen's University was hosting a symposium titled Art and Recovery, Creative Voices in the Aftermath of Silence. They asked me to be their opening speaker. At first, I laughed, a reflex. The girl I used to be, quieter, hidden, still couldn't fathom herself standing behind a podium. But I said yes, not for recognition. For the younger version of me who once whispered into pillows at night. Will anyone ever understand? The lecture hall was small, warm, wood-paneled walls and old velvet seats. About 90 people, most of them young women in oversized sweaters and Doc Martens, sat quietly waiting. I stood at the podium with nothing but a glass of water and my hands, shaking slightly. I didn't come here to teach, I began. I came to tell the truth. I told them about the years I made myself small, about being called difficult, dramatic, unstable, about how long it took me to believe that survival didn't need to look fragile to be real. I told them about painting as a lifeline, not a career move. And I told them that their stories, no matter how quiet, messy, or unresolved, deserved air. I ended with this. You don't have to explain your healing. You don't have to brand it or soften it or make it palatable. But if you decide to share it, make sure it's yours. The version that kept you breathing, not the one they'll clap for. Afterward, a young girl, maybe 19, came up to me with her hands clenched. I'm writing again, she whispered, because of what you said. I'm not ashamed anymore. I hugged her, not as a speaker, as someone who had once needed to hear the same thing. You never needed to be, I told her, but I'm glad you know now. That night, I returned home and opened a fresh canvas. Not because someone asked for it, not because I owed the algorithm anything, just because I could. I painted a woman sitting by still water, not reaching, not running, not explaining, just resting. I called it, unapologetically here, because I was, and I would not disappear again. It started with an email. Subject line, Solo Exhibition Proposal, The Whitmore, NYC. I read it 3 times before I let myself believe it was real. The Whitmore Gallery, Manhattan, a clean-lined contemporary space known for launching bold new voices, particularly women artists who didn't fit neat categories. I'd visited once, years ago, during a trip with Ryan. He barely looked at the art. I lingered by a piece that looked like grief caught in glass. Now they were offering me a solo exhibition. My first instinct wasn't joy. It was disbelief, followed closely by fear. I waited 2 days before replying, not because I wasn't interested, but because I couldn't quiet the voice in my head that said, "You're not ready for this. You're not consistent enough. You're just riding a moment. You're not real yet." Old ghosts wear new clothes. Even when you leave the room, they follow. Still, I responded. Politely, professionally, I said yes. Clara was ecstatic. "You have to go," she said, eyes wide, voice already 10 steps ahead. "This is huge, Em. It's not just exposure, it's credibility, legacy. The people who walk into that gallery, they change careers, they change lives." I smiled, but my stomach twisted. Because I knew what she meant, but I also knew what I feared. Visibility came with weight, and I wasn't sure I'd built strong enough shoulders yet. The gallery's curator, Isla Morin, scheduled a Zoom call for the following week. She had sharp eyes and a warm voice, French accent, minimal makeup, the kind of woman who could spot inauthenticity through a computer screen. "We want your voice, Emily," she said. "Not a performance, not a trend. The truth you've been painting, it deserves a room of its own." Her words should have comforted me. Instead, they cracked something open. Because for the first time in my life, people weren't doubting me, they were expecting me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in front of a blank canvas for hours, brush in hand, but no stroke felt honest. I wasn't blocked. I wasn't empty. I was afraid of betraying the version of me people had decided to believe in. There was power in anonymity, in smallness, in being the underdog who surprised everyone. But now I had to show up. And not just survive, deliver. Noah came over the next day, uninvited but welcome. He brought fresh bread, cheap wine, and a crooked grin that somehow always made things feel lighter. He noticed my silence immediately. "You look like someone who's waiting for permission to breathe," I laughed, but didn't answer. Later, while he assembled a new shelf in my studio, one I'd ordered to make room for new work, he said softly, "You know, it's okay if this feels terrifying." I paused. Paintbrush midair. "I thought I'd be excited," I admitted. "But it feels like everyone's looking at me through glass. Like I'm allowed to be seen now, but only if I stay perfectly curated." He stood, stretched, leaned against the doorframe, then smashed the glass, show them the messy version too. In the days that followed, I started working again. Slowly, intentionally. I didn't try to paint answers, I painted questions. I let the pieces unfold like conversations I hadn't had yet. One canvas featured a woman in profile, her expression unreadable, hands stained with color. Behind her, a wall covered in words, blurred, half-wiped, illegible, her truth there, but untranslatable. I called it, "Not for Translation." Another piece was entirely abstract, crimson layered over deep blue, scraped back with palette knives, exposing soft pink beneath, rage and tenderness side by side. I titled it, "Permission to Feel Ugly." And a third, quieter one, a childlike drawing of a house, gently warped, windows uneven, a single figure inside, alone but not trapped. That one? Still here, one morning Isla emailed to confirm dates for the show. "We'd like to open mid-June. Title the collection when you're ready." I stared at the blinking cursor for 5 minutes before typing. What I couldn't say. She replied an hour later, perfect. As the exhibition drew nearer, I received interview requests. Not exploitative ones this time, real ones. Journalists who had read the frame, who referenced closure and let them talk and asked about process, not gossip. But I said no to most of them. Because right now, my art said enough. Because I didn't want to explain anymore. I wanted to exist. A week before I left for New York, I visited the gallery space where it all started. My first group show, the little room in Charlotte, where closure first hung on a softly lit wall. The space was empty, closed for renovations, dust on the floor, silence thick. I sat in the middle of the room and closed my eyes. And I whispered out loud, just to myself, "You're allowed to take up space now. You're allowed to be loud. You're allowed to be more than what they survived." And then I stood, and I packed my truth, and I got on the train, and I headed toward a new city, toward a new room, toward the version of me that no longer asked for permission to arrive. What they see, what I hold. The night of my solo exhibition arrived draped in soft gold and quiet weight. New York pulsed outside the gallery's glass doors, its usual clamor softened by the gravity of the evening. Inside, the Whitmore Gallery glowed, every white wall humming under carefully arranged lighting, every shadow curated, every piece suspended like a breath between inhale and truth. My name was printed in clean serif on the gallery's welcome panel, What I Couldn't Say, a solo exhibition by Emily Carter. I stood beside it at 5:58 p.m., just before the doors opened, holding a glass of water I hadn't yet sipped. My palms were cold, my spine straight. I felt both inside my body and far above it. When the first guest entered, heels clicking, scarves unwinding, I braced. Not from fear, but from the sheer silent power of being seen. By 6:30, the gallery was full. People moved like slow rivers through the space, some alone, some in pairs, some whispering behind their phones, others pausing in front of each piece with the kind of reverence I had once thought only belonged to artists with names bigger than mine. The room had been arranged with deliberate tension and tenderness. My pieces weren't ordered chronologically, but emotionally. Closure greeted viewers first, setting the tone with a woman's silhouette caught mid-turn. Leaving or arriving, no one could tell. Still, here was placed in a quiet alcove, framed by soft lighting and hush. Let Them Talk stood boldly near the center, large, raw, loud in texture and line. Unapologetically, here offered a breath of peace at the end, like the exhale after grief. And then there was the newest piece, one no one had seen, one I painted alone in the early hours of the week before, hands trembling, breath shallow. It was called The Echo Room. A woman walking through a hallway of distorted mirrors. None of them reflected her face. Only her shadow, fragmented, echoing behind her like a history that refused to stay silent. Viewers lingered there the longest. I stayed close enough to watch, but far enough not to intrude. That painting was not an explanation. It was an offering. Strangers came up to me, their eyes soft, some trembling with things they didn't yet have words for. I saw myself in that one, a woman whispered, near not for translation. Even the parts I thought I'd buried. One man stood silently for a moment before saying, "You made something ugly feel sacred." I smiled. Said thank you. Let their words move through me, but not define me. The Emily of a year ago would have swallowed their praise like a life raft. Tonight, I simply let it land. Like rainfall. Real, but passing. At 7:08 p.m., I saw him. Ryan. He stood just inside the entrance, hands tucked into the pockets of a sleek navy coat. His hair was shorter, grayer, but his presence, subtle, observant, always just slightly outside the room, hadn't changed. Hadn't invited him, but I wasn't surprised he came. What did surprise me was how calm I felt. Not numb, but anchored. I watched him move through the space, slow and deliberate, pausing in front of closure for longer than I expected. Then Let Them Talk, his jaw tightening. And when he reached the echo room, I watched his chest rise, then still. He didn't look at me, not yet. When he finally did, it was from across the room. We locked eyes. He started walking toward me. Every step felt suspended in time. "Hi, Emily," he said quietly. "Ryan." A pause. He glanced at the painting beside us, unapologetically here, then back at me. "This is a lot," he said, his voice a notch lower than usual. "It is. I didn't come to stir anything up, I just wanted to see it for myself." He looked down, then back up. "I read what you said. In the interview, the article. It was hard to read." "Imagine living it," I replied. The words weren't sharp, just true. He didn't flinch. Maybe he expected worse. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," he said. "I know I don't deserve that." I said nothing. I just wanted to acknowledge it, all of it. The way I left, the way I made you feel invisible. I let his words hang there. They weren't redemption, they were recognition. And that, strangely, was enough. "You didn't just make me feel invisible, Ryan," I said quietly. "You needed me to be invisible so you wouldn't have to look at yourself." He nodded, slowly. "And now," I asked, "what do you see?" He looked around the room again. "You," he said. He didn't say, "You've changed." He didn't say, "I'm proud." Just, "You." And for once, I believed it wasn't about who I used to be, but who I was now. He stepped back, gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. And then he left. No drama, no second glance, just gone. And with him, something old left too. Later, when most of the guests had gone, I stepped into the back of the gallery, where a small bench overlooked the entire room. Noah joined me without a word. He didn't ask how it went, didn't offer platitudes. He just sat beside me, our shoulders brushing, both of us looking out at the quiet space that had, for 2 hours, carried my entire soul on its walls. "I saw him," he said eventually. I nodded. "You okay?" I thought for a moment. "I'm not shaken, not undone, just tired in a way that feels earned." He smiled. "Like finishing a long hike and realizing the view really was worth it?" "Exactly that." I leaned my head gently against his shoulder, and for a long time, neither of us moved. The next morning, the reviews came in. One critic wrote, "Carter doesn't beg for empathy. She demands witness, and somehow she does so with grace, not fury." Another, "There's no pretense here, just precision, and the quiet insistence that truth, when told honestly, can take up space without apology." But my favorite came from a blogger whose post only had 38 likes. "I've never been to an art show where I felt like I had permission to cry. This one gave me that." I didn't need a bigger headline than that, because that was always the point. Not spectacle, not revenge, but recognition. As I packed my bags for Charlotte that night, I carefully wrapped each of the remaining canvases in soft cloth, sliding them into the crate with practiced tenderness. But I left the echo room behind. The gallery wanted to keep it for an extended run, and I said yes, because some truths deserve more time in the light. She didn't burn the bridges. She walked past them, silent, steady, eyes forward. No explosions, no vengeance. Just the quiet, unwavering power of becoming exactly what they said she couldn't. Not to prove a point, but to reclaim the space where her voice had once been silenced. They called her too fragile, too dramatic, too broken to build anything real, so she built a life out of the very pieces they left her in. And when the world came close enough to listen, really listen, she didn't scream, she painted, she healed, out loud, without apology. And maybe that's the kind of revenge the world isn't ready for. The kind that doesn't look like war, but like peace you had to bleed for. If this story found you, touched something tender in you, leave a comment. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just let it be true. Because your voice, even whispered, might be exactly what someone else needs to finally breathe again.